in Esther. We're about 4 BC, just so you know. I have a few pictures. Are they downloaded?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to show you this to get familiar. Okay, so this is called the Citadel. And the Citadel is usually a lofty place out of stone or whatsoever, like a tower or something like that. But this is called the Citadel of Susa. Susa is one of the 8 oldest cities, I believe, in the ancient world. And here it is. Here's the modern Citadel of Susa. And what you're looking at here is the palace of Artaxerxes, which was also the palace of Darius, which is also the palace of Cyrus. Okay? So remember when we were coming back to rebuild the temple and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel and Ezra are alive? This is where they came from. Matter of fact, Nehemiah was sent from this palace all the way home to go rebuild the wall in Jerusalem. And if you want to remember, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, V, W, X. So you have A, B, C, and then X. D, so, all right, B, remember we're in Babylon. C is King Cyrus, then next comes King Darius, then next comes King Xerxes. Just an easy way to remember that. Babylon, Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes. Okay, that one is free. That's from the Lord tonight. Kind of cool. We're all gaining our scholarly merit here. Again, this is another portion. I believe there's a large body of water on the other side of this, but I just want you to see. Now, remember, this was built way back, okay, 8th century, they say, BC. Now, it's probably more like 6th century because, you know, we weren't around back then. Look at here. This is from the Babylonian and Persian artwork. A lot of times you'll see the Ishtar gate, which is that beautiful lapis lazuli gate that Nebuchadnezzar built. Now, Nebuchadnezzar built that after he conquered Jerusalem. I think it's one of the most beautiful gates in the world, but I think he stole that idea from the temple facade, because if you line them up, it's exactly the same. You're seeing a cherub, a Babylonian or Persian cherub, and then this is what the city looks like today. And then here's the channels of water around the city, how they would irrigate and funnel water. Very brilliant people, but that's because God raised them up, so they had added wisdom. Here's another picture of a cherub or a heavenly creature. Now remember, if God is raising up a nation like Egypt, like Babylon, a lot of their ideas are the same. They have creatures with different faces. A lot of times that's demonic. There's also a lot of times where prophets saw visions of heavenly things and people made artwork out of it. That's kind of how history would continue. Okay? Now here are these Persian altars. They called these guys the immortals, and they guarded the king. Okay? They were highly, highly skilled archers. They weren't immortals. That was just to wreak fear in neighboring cultures. But remember, at one point in time, the Babylonian Empire was taken over by, which is Mesopotamia, between 2 rivers, Medes and Persians. That whole area was taken over by Assyria. But before that and after that, they were the most powerful militaries ever. Okay? Then until obviously Rome comes. But these were very scary images. And this is a real wall. It's made out of like jade and lapis lazuli, just so you can kind of see the warriors who ransacked Jerusalem back in the day. Okay? Again, just some culture, you know, so you can see what the citadel looked like. And again, from that citadel, they came and rebuilt this wall. Now, let's get into Esther just a little bit here. And again, I just want to show you this all now that this is a mahogany box. They do say in the temple, especially on Yom Kippur, they had a mahogany box, okay? Mahogany is good and it's strong and it's beautiful. I think that's why they chose to use it on this box. And then again, now the lots that they had, sometimes they found a set of lots, by the way. Remember, Purim is Hebrew and it means lots. In Masada. Now Masada was Herod's summer palace. It's a beautiful palace that overlooks the Dead Sea. And they actually found pot shards. They did not have time to make professional lots. So they broke a piece of pottery and a bunch of different things and wrote on it the people's names. They actually found it, okay? But if you had more time, again, maybe you'd craft them to be like this. Some of the old lots was actually have you ever seen one of those dice that has multiple sides on it, 8 or 9 sides, and you roll it and it has a different value on each of them? They found one closer to this that they believe. It could have been Haman's lot or what. Now, remember, when did they use lots in the Bible? Oh man, Judas hung himself. What are we going to do? We need someone else. Okay? Matthias, your lot. Now, when they say that, your lot was cast, typically what that means, it's like this. So let's say they have between 4 guys. Okay, this is your lot, Matthias. We'll put an N on it, or it's the big one. John, that's yours. It has the scratch on the back. James and Peter. And they go, oh, Matthias, your lot's drawn. Maybe it has their name on it, but that's what they did. Remember, when Nehemiah came back to rebuild this from the citadel of Susa, which is where the story of Esther comes from, they drew lots 2 times. One, because all the records are burned down. Who's a real priest? Well, I'm a priest. Prove it. Oh, I have. Well, it was in the filing cabinet. It got burned down. So, well, God knows. We'll draw lots. And on that time, they would do more like a Urim and Thummim. And they would say, who's a real priest? And we'll say, if you are, you get the Urim. And if not, you get the Thummim. And then they would draw, and it never failed. Okay? It never actually failed, and that's how they would draw lots. Also, they would draw lots, it says in the Proverbs, to put an end to strife. Because that's like the ultimate, paper, rock, scissors is the ultimate way to decide something, right? Once it's decided, it's a third-party mutual witness that's unbiased, which is why lots were so. And the Lord honored that because, again, it's like, Lord, you know my heart. You know I want him to be an apostle. It's like, think about who you want to be the next president. What if they're both the same, belief system? They're both Republican or both Democrat, and it's you and your spouse, and you both like someone because they're each from your hometown. How could we ever choose? Put an end to the matter. You would draw lots. This is back in the day. They would draw lots also to see who would bring wood into the temple. Remember, we talked about that last week, how much wood is burned? A lot of wood. Think about when you go camping, there's a whole pile of wood only gets you a few hours down the road. So anyway, that's some of the idea of lots. Now, the word Purim, again, is lots in Hebrew. If it just said lots, most people would know about it, but because it's masked in Hebrew, unless you take a step further to transliterate this, you'll miss it. But what do lots have to do with the story of Esther? Evil Haman. Okay, so I guess it's appropriate to get into the story now. By the way, I just want you to hear this theme. There's 2 themes. One is prophetic, and the other one is, it's not happenstance. It's the whole point of Purim for us today. In Esther 4:14, let's see here. What's happening is, okay, let me just tell you a little bit of the story, and this is a major themes I want you to walk away from tonight with, okay? So we are in Susa right now. Now, when I say we are in Susa, what do you mean? I thought we came back to build the temple. Well, we did. Some of us did. Imagine if I'm from Mexico and I'm working and I have family, but then I get deported and my family's still here. Most of the people in the post-exilic era after Babylon came back with Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel, the governor. Matter of fact, Zerubbabel was the governor of Persia, but he was a Jew. Nehemiah was the cupbearer. So they were all in Babylon for so long, at least 70 years, that they now had their kids enrolled in the local school. They were intermarrying. All that stuff was happening. They were, well, I just built my new house. I can't leave this. So many Jews stayed behind. And at the time, Cyrus was now saved because of Daniel's, time in the lion's den. He's like, your God is God, basically. Back then, that's how you got saved, your faith in Yahweh. And so this is no longer a hostile place to be. This is all an upgrade now. We went from slaves to sons, and we live in a palace. So a lot of the Jewish, and some of the Jewish population was still back home because Nebuchadnezzar wanted gardens and fruit to be brought in for tax purposes and stuff. So people were still there. They went back. Other people stayed. Now, when we're talking about the story of Esther, we are talking about the population of Jews that are still in Babylon when Nehemiah is coming to rebuild the temple. That happened around 40 years before we're talking right now. Okay? So, in this palace, Mordecai, for an example, is one of the officials. They say that he was one of the first chiefs of the Sanhedrin. Okay? Typically, the chief of the Sanhedrin is going to be the high priest, but when you're over in Babylon, there's no temple, there's no ephod, so you just look like this. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting, blue and white is the color of Israel, right? Remember we learned about blue is the color of the tassels. Blue is the color that was wrapped around the Ark of the Covenant. When they honored Mordecai, do you know what colors he was honored with when he rode around the city? Okay, so let's talk about the story real quick. Most of you familiar, but in case you're not. We're in Citadel at the city Susa in Babylon. And basically what happens is two of the eunuchs got mad at King Ahasuerus. And they basically wanted to lay hands on him, not to impart blessing and prophecy and power and healing, but to actually get a hold of him, right? That's that phrase, by good guys lay hands on you is good. Bad guys means I want to really mess you up. And Mordecai heard about it, and he sent the message along. Those two guys were hung, and they wrote it in the king's journal, but that's all that happened. So next thing you know, Haman is advancing in governmental rank, and everywhere he goes, people bow to him except for Mordecai. Now, by the way, Mordecai means warrior. There's a really cool, let me tell you about Mordecai. There's a cool little naming convention, which doesn't surprise me. How awesome is our God? Mordecai is the son of Jair, who's the son of Shimei, who's the son of Kish, which is the father of the tribe of the Benjamites, okay? Now, Jair means not only my light, it means one who diffuses light. Think about an oil diffuser, and it diffuses the fragrance all over the place, okay? Jair diffuses light. Shimei means one who has a reputation. Kish actually means power, like bow of power, bow of strength. And Benjamin means son of my right hand. Well, we know that in the last days, whoever is faithful to Jesus goes what? To his right. Sheep on the right, goats on the left. You know, and if you're to the left hand, you're out. But Benjamin means you are the child of my right hand. So that would be an accurate even praise for Jesus. You are the son of the right hand. But this is basically what Mordecai, what his name and lineage means. A son of the right hand, a partner of God, will gain his power and reputation, okay, will gain his power and reputation by diffusing the light. That man is a true warrior. That's what the name Mordecai means. Most people go, they look up Mordecai and goes, yeah, it means something of Marduk, one of the Babylonian gods. Mordecai is a Jewish name. So they're just connecting dots that just because he's in Babylon doesn't mean he has a Babylonian name. However, Esther does have a Babylonian name. It says in chapter 2, verse 7, her real name was Hadassah. But she was given the name Esther because we were hiding the fact that we were Jews because, you know, if anything happens, remember we're on the guest pass and the guest already went home. Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and Ezra, all the guys that had favor with Darius and Cyrus left. So now we're all good, and if something bad happens, remember they say blood's thicker than water or everything. If anything bad happens, we're on a visa and it already expired, but since we're friends, everything is good. The moment we're not friends, we're out of here. So they changed her name to Esther. Now, Esther's where we get the word Easter from. That was a real Babylonian goddess, okay? Easter was a Babylonian goddess, which is where they named her. So having a name Esther living in Babylon or Persia was the right name to have when you lived there. That's the name if you want to have honor and favor and majesty. Kind of like right now, if you named your business after the president or after the country, it would really have a powerful, some type of favor or demeanor or clout. So basically what's happening is now Haman is advancing in rank, and everyone's bowing to him except for Mordecai. Now, why will this warrior who diffuses light, whose father has power, and their inheritance and their reputation is only because they are a child of God, why will he not bow to Haman? Yeah, but what about honor the rulers of your land? Unless they go against the ultimate ruler, right? Because then they're acting out of line. Well, he wouldn't bow to Haman, so Haman was getting furious. And he was honored by King Artaxerxes a lot, and he was very wise. Haman had 10 sons. He was a very successful businessman, had a lot of military strategies. He was a very, Very savvy in his day, but one thing he hated God. Our God, he hated God. He loved probably the Babylonian god of Marduk or Bel, but he hated Yahweh. And we know that because one of Yahweh's sons would only bow to Yahweh, and he hated him. Matter of fact, he hated him so bad, he wanted to lay hands on him. So all of a sudden he goes to Artaxerxes. He says, Artaxerxes, and of course he doesn't tell him who they are, because I know some of your peeps are Jewish, but he basically goes, there's a people that don't believe in your laws and your kingship. What should be done to them? I think they should be annihilated so that your law is the only law, because and he kind of tickles his pride, you're the only king. And he goes, gosh, you're right. So he makes an edict, and the king says, and then, by the way, he also offers to bribe him. He says, I'll also give you like 10,000 units of our currency. And he goes, great, well, you have all my men, and the money's going to go in the treasury, do whatever you see. Here's my signet ring. So he makes the edict, and he says and now Haman fills in the details. Every Jew is going to be annihilated. So he sends that out on the 13th of the next month. So there's a few weeks to act here. But all of a sudden, one of the famous parts here, when Mordecai hears this, he's wearing sackcloth and ashes. Now, this kingdom was so prestigious, you can't come in the gate wearing sackcloth and ashes. Kind of like you ever seen those signs that say no shoes, no shirt, no service? But this is like what you'd more get at one of those prissy clubs, like if you're not wearing a suit, yeah, you can't come in. Okay. Well, it was like that. And so Mordecai couldn't come in, and he couldn't come in and talk to Esther. So he doesn't come in. She's like, what's going on? And all of a sudden, she sends one of the king's eunuchs that was sent to guard her to Mordecai and basically says, what's going on? And he goes, haven't you heard? There's an edict. And she's like, what? So now pick up with me in chapter 4. And this is, by the way, this is one of the things I want you to grab a hold of, and then I'll tell you the punchline of the story as it relates to us today. In 4, and we'll pick up in... how about in verse 11, he's just telling her what happened. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes inside the king's inner court without being called, there is but one law, they'll be put to death. Now, this is kind of like a thing that gives us understanding under Yom Kippur. If you go into the presence of God uninvited, or you did, you'd go in, but you wouldn't come out, okay, except for on Yom Kippur. Well, this is kind of where the kings of the earth got their thing. I'm such a powerful king. If you come before me uninvited, there's a law that you'll be put to death. So Esther was kind of like going, oh, I can't just go in there. And Mordecai, they told Mordecai what Esther said. And Mordecai told them the reply to Esther. Don't think yourself that in the king's palace you will escape more than all the other Jews. In other words, you have to risk your life, because if you don't, you're going to die anyway. If you keep silent at this time, I know relief, I'm in verse 14, and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. Think about the judges. There was always another judge or another prototype savior who the Lord raised up. But if your father's house and yourself will perish if you don't. And who knows whether you have not come into the kingdom. Here's the famous verse, for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews and hold a fast. Now, it's interesting that they begin to fast. Now, why? Now, the festival of Purim is a feast, but there's only a feast after a what? That's right, a fast. Go hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days. That's called a dry fast, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Those were the women that were responsible to keep charge of her. Then I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Then Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther ordered him. And basically what happens now is Esther goes before the king. I should really call her Hadassah. That's her real name. It means compassion. Esther is Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, but Hadassah is compassion. And she has compassion on our people. We don't want them to die or perish. So she fasts. She goes before the king, and he holds out his golden scepter. This is where it's written about the Lord. Your scepter will reign the kingdom forever. You know, your righteousness will have no end. That scepter is a gold wand, if you will, but it's decorated and ornate. Some of them have the king's seal. Some of them have a lion or a tiger. They found one in Israel that had a pomegranate. They're very beautiful, but it's what you'd see like an abracadabra. A wand is the scepter of a magician. Think about something like that. and he would raise out the scepter, which was an extension of his arm. So think about, I'm more powerful, I have a long arm, and with this arm I will make my edicts. And so she touched the gold scepter, and he raised it out, which means you live. You know, a lot of the movies, they go like this and they live, and they go like this and they die. But they would usually do that with a scepter. The thumbs up is something that, like in our culture, okay? So raises the scepter, she touches it, and he says, whatever you wish, up to a half in my kingdom. Why? Because you're my wife. Because you won the beauty pageant, and that's Vashti. Remember, Vashti showed up, and she wouldn't come to his feast, and he wanted her beauty to be seen because she was fair to look upon, but her heart wasn't so beautiful. And so they banished her out of the kingdom. They need a new queen. Here comes Esther now. She wins the beauty pageant. She's the wife, but even the wife has to obey the laws of the king. And so what happens is now she has favor. What do you want? She says, just come to my feast. So he shows up at the feast, and she says, someone is going to kill all the people in which I am. The king's like, what? She goes, yeah, evil Haman. Now, by the way, Haman was making, this is a lot of what I want you to understand. Haman made this 50-foot gallows to hang Mordecai on, okay? And then before that happened, he goes, Esther's reading, and she goes, Mordecai saved your life. Remember, it's written in the king. And then Haman goes, in a side conversation, what should be done to honor a man? And Haman wanted to be paraded around, right? And all of a sudden, how it works is then Esther goes, well, then honor Mordecai, because he did this. And then Haman's setting himself up to be glorified. And then Haman says, the king said, what should be done? And Haman says, put him on a horse in your royal robes, parade him around the city, honor him, let everyone hear that this is what happens to the man who delights, and that the king delights to honor. And the king goes, that's a great idea. Do it to Mordecai. And Haman's like, what? And all of a sudden, he gets dressed in blue and white clothes. Now, this is very prophetic because that is the color of the priest. Blue and white is the color of the Israeli flag. That's the color of the cover of the ark box. It's the cover of our tallits. It's the color blue, which is when every time they had an appearance of God or a vision of his throne, like in Ezekiel, it was sapphire blue, very powerful. And it happens that a child of God who emanates light, who fights with light, who's a warrior of light, who has a strong foundation, happens to be wearing blue and white. This is very, very prophetic. So Mordecai would be a prototype of an intercessor, okay? He's not a prototype Messiah because he didn't do anything but alarm and fast, but that's what a priest would do. It would warn people on behalf of danger, celebrate with you on behalf of success, pray and fast. That's what a priest does, which is what we are all called to do, right? To be priests and kings. Now, this 3-day fast ended up diverting a Holocaust. Think about that. This was the first Holocaust attempt. Well, I think the first one was in Egypt when they started killing the Israeli children by the droves, throwing them in the Nile, remember? The second Holocaust is here, diverted. The third one after this is where we get the Hanukkah story, and the fourth one obviously is in Germany, okay? This is not our first rodeo, but it kind of is like interesting that if the people of God will begin to gather together and fast and pull with the Lord, you have no idea what national catastrophes could be averted, really. I mean, this is a very powerful note for us here. Who knows? Maybe we are on the earth for such a time as this, right? I want you to understand, so okay, long story short, it's not that long, it's like 10 chapters, but the book of Esther in a short tense, the king basically says, and if you look up Purim, by the way, you'll see some people keep it today, some people yesterday or tomorrow, there's 2 days, and here's the reason it was. Finally, when the king heard this, he has Haman hanged on the own gallows he made for Mordecai, and he says, and Esther goes, well, since your law can't be reversed, give the Jews a right to defend themselves when people come out to massacre them because of your first edict. And he goes, great. So they did it, and in the Susa alone, 500 people were killed that were enemies of the Jews. They were going to kill. Most of this is in self-defense, by the way. There's a martial art in Israel called Krav Maga. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's pretty awesome, but all of the martial art is only dependent. If you don't attack me, my moves don't work. It's like, have you ever seen a guy, he takes Taekwondo for like 4 years, and he goes, okay, let's fight. And you go like this, and he goes, no, you have to like I only learned 10 moves. So if you chop me, then I'll block and flip you. But if you don't chop them, they can't use their moves, you know? It's kind of like that. If you don't come at a Krav Maga guy with like an attack, they don't have attack moves, they have defense moves. And think about the nation of Israel. All they are is defending, because we already won. We don't have to fight for anything. We have to defend what's already been given to us. Same thing in Christ. We are not fighting for anything. We are really, like, to get stuff. We're kind of fighting to just keep stuff. Seek your salvation day after day with fear and trembling. Why? It's already yours. You have to guard it. Guard your heart. Okay? Now, when I say yes, you have to fight against discouragement, all that stuff, but really to keep what? Encouraged. You have to fight to keep in victory. Okay, so anyway, so most of the people, they were defending themselves, okay? But they were so successful, and she goes, and of course, I was joking with my brother about this. I'm like, but some people weren't home tonight, or they're out of town. So she said the next day to the king, let us also tomorrow be granted to defend ourselves and exterminate our enemies. And so they did. So if you're in the city, you keep Purim on one day. If you're out of the city, you keep it on another day, because there was 2 days given to the Jews to basically, rid ourselves of our enemies. Now, what Haman did is when he wanted to exterminate the Jews, gosh, that's such a big decision. Whatever day will I decide to exterminate them on? And so what he did is he cast the lots, and this is where the whole story comes from. Haman cast a lot and decided on the 13th of next month, because that's the lot now. When you draw the 13th of next month, it either means two things. One, you have a dice with 30 sides on it, which is highly unlikely. Or two, you have a whole box full of lots like this, and each one represents a month. And after you get your month, you do it again, and each one represents a day. And that's why you'd have a whole box of lots. Okay, so that's where the holiday comes from. And as it stands out, every person who hated the Jews in the whole kingdom was removed. And this became a very positive place. And not only was the Holocaust diverted, but our enemies were also removed, which means now we finally have peace in the land. I think one of the stories we're supposed to get from this, whether you're in the homeland, whether you're at church, whether you're out of church on the mission field, whatever, whether you're in the right place or whether you made a mistake or some circumstance happens outside of your control and you're not in the right place, number one, that God is always there. Number two, that God can use anything for the good. Number three, so some people will say, and they're not denominations who fast or prophesy, but they go, fasting doesn't change anything, you can't change God. Right? But it's like, really? That's interesting, because every time they fast, they did change. Matter of fact, when the story of Jonah, he goes and preaches, and the Ninevites fasted for 3 days, and that's one of the times, there's two. One of the times where it says the Lord changed his mind about what he was going to do. That actually did change God. What did? A 3-day fast. Okay? You want to change something in your life? Take a fast. It can make a world of difference. And maybe not for you, maybe for someone else, right? When Esther and Mordecai commanded to fast, everyone who fasted lived. Think about it that way. So sometimes it really is life. Does that make sense? I skip a few meals and I have favor from heaven. It's like, beloved, no. But it means that much to God when we're designed to eat, and that they say in the last days, eat, drink, and be merry. So when you're fasting in the last days, that's really going to be rare. Some people never fasted their whole life. Think about that. If they're not doing a blood test and they don't believe in the Lord, most of them go their whole life without fasting. I mean, it really is. God sees it. I'll just tell it to you that way. And it's something you can do all the time. You can enjoy God's supernatural favor all the time. But if you ever have to change the circumstances that are around you, or you're at a dead end and you need to add some extra pieces on the chessboard, if you know what I'm saying, so you're not in a checkmate, take a fast. Because God's the same God. Okay, now here's the main moral of this. And of course, I encourage you to read all 10 chapters of Esther, even though it should be properly named Hadassah. Daniel, the prophet, had a new name too. They called him Belteshazzar. But no one says, let's study the book of Belteshazzar. They all say the book of Daniel, So we could call it the book of Hadassah and be accurate, but here's the thing. Why are we honoring tonight? One, because it's always good to have a feast or a fast. Both of them are wonderful. Number two, we want history to be retold. Nowadays, if they don't make a movie about it, you're not going to remember this stuff, because this is not necessarily a Sunday message. The second thing, or third thing, is that God knows that some of us have enemies surrounding us. It's very true. They could be physical, they could be spiritual, they could be figurative, they could be your enemies of discouragement, enemies of, you could have a physical infirmity, you could have adversity mentally, you could have challenges in your work, home, family. And I want you to know that the prime essence of this is when people fasted, God heard, and what did he do ultimately? Not only did he give them relief from their enemies, but he removed all their enemies. And so what I want to do before we do anything else is I just want to pray for a moment. And you don't have to share this, but I want you to think about for a minute in the Holy Spirit, do you have any enemies in your life? And they could be enemies of, what they call the enemy of your soul. And it could be unbelief, doubt, discouragement. You could have troubles in your family, marriage, your work, your job, your school, with your children, your finances, your health, whatever. I want you to know that God is the same God. And sometimes, can you imagine if they didn't fast and they all died? And God sometimes is like, I gave you the keys and I gave you my card. Like what Artaxerxes said to Haman is, take the money and the men and do what is right in your eyes. I'm giving you authority. And what Jesus did is he gave us authority over devils, over demons, over doubt, over discouragement, over all that stuff. And we have to act. And so whenever the Holy Spirit vectors in or zeroes in on the enemy of your soul, whatever's bothering you, then I want to ask you the question is, if you can, are you willing to fast about that specifically? Aside from what we did, and many of you fasted today, bless you. The Lord will always, always reward that. But just take some time. And if you can't think of something, but one of the enemies of your friend or family or spouse or son or daughter or work or school or church, whatever it is, would you be willing to fast on behalf of someone else? Or pray, however it works, and be the priest that can really bring about change in someone else's life. Because I tell you, it will. It will change the world.